So don't anybody say anything embarrassing. And I'm going to go ahead and get our PowerPoint started. Are you all able to see that opening screen?
Yes.
Good. Excellent. All right. Super. Well, I briefly talked about just Zoom features. I can mute you, but I don't like doing that. I love the egalitarian nature of this tool. So everybody is familiar with video conferencing. Thanks for muting if you're not chatting. Wanted to just refresh everybody about who is on the Ottawa full-time team, because sometimes folks have questions about what's coming up or what's going on. And so I'm going to just remind us of key people. We're going to talk a little bit about our expectations for graduate students, as well as those of us who teach the graduate students. And we're going to focus a little bit of our time tonight specifically on the executive MBA students. For those of you, if you could jump onto chat and just share with me if you have taught for the EMBA, I would love to hear that, as well as your name and the area you teach in. So if you could do a chat to everyone with your name, area you teach, and where you're located, that would be fantastic. I'm Kristen. I work for OU full-time. I'm at the Overland Park location, and I've worked for OU since about 2011, and have had just a wonderful variety of roles and opportunities within the organization. And right now, the hat I'm wearing is teaching full-time online, probably half undergrads, half graduates, and pretty active in the EMBA as well. So thank you all for jumping in. I see economics, I see online, I see HR, see nursing, thanks. What else? MBA, EMBA, good. Cost accounting, super. And more accounting, excellent. Computer science, thank you. We are grateful for all of you. Super, that's fantastic. Well, we've got a very broad group of faculty represented, which is outstanding. And we want to hear all your perspectives tonight. So just a quick review of the academic affairs team, because occasionally there are some changes. And for those of you located in Arizona, or some of you out in Wisconsin, you may not be aware of the whole team. So just a quick refresher, the Dean of Academic Affairs is Dr. Eric Koch, and he offices part-time in Overland Park and part-time in Ottawa, Kansas. And his emails there, Eric is fun, he's engaging, he really supports the faculty, and he cares very much about rigor and quality. So get to know him better. Andrea Cook, you all know, because she handles all the scheduling and most of faculty affairs for online and for Ottawa Midwest, except for the residential campus. And then those of you who teach predominantly online, there are 4 of us who are full-time online faculty members, and hopefully you've been getting emails from us in terms of feedback related to your idea scores, or if you have any student issues or just need a coach or encourager or somebody to bounce ideas off of. That's one of the hats that the 4 of us get to wear, Karen, Fred, George, and I. So we act as mentors term by term to those who teach part-time. And if any policy questions come up or we can help you, please feel very welcome to reach out to us. And then for those of you who teach in different academic areas, there's also a lead faculty member over your content area. And Andrea can connect you with those folks if you have some questions about a specific course, how it's being taught, you want to recommend a book change or something along those lines that are very content focused. You've got lead faculty. So we're really here to help support all of you who do the important work of teaching Ottawa University students. And so that's our team. So I wanted to just start. I was hoping a few of you might share, as you think about undergrad versus graduate students, what you experienced when you were a graduate student or maybe some of the things that you observe with the students that you teach or have taught recently. Would anybody be willing to share a little bit on that?
Sure, this is Charlie. I would be. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Let me turn down my fan here. You know, it's summer, it's humid. One thing that really strikes me is you start to feel old when it's like, how in God's name is my kid? She's going to college in Japan. But how am I old enough to have a child going to college? But the thing that I've noticed in her academic community versus mine, as I went to graduate school, is that it was all brick and mortar, and we connected with each other and we made friends and we learned to network, and those became invaluable for, clinical consultation later, clinical referrals. Remember people, wow, I remember that person in grad school that was great with EMDR. I know a great person to refer to. And she realized rather than on her own networking and connecting with people and personal connections on social media, and I tell her, sweetie, it's not the same. You've got to be sitting in the room with the person to have the connection, and I said, if you can go to school brick and mortar, even better. There's nothing like sitting with that shared energy. And as an introvert, you're going to have to learn to step out and not just sit behind your phone and pretend like you're connecting. So I've just seen it change. It's become both more and less personal, if that's possible.
So I appreciate those observations. Thank you. Yeah. That is a major shift. Most of us who teach online did not go to grad school taking online classes, right? So that's relatively new, and we have to figure out how to parlay all of our expertise into that mode of learning. Thanks, Charlie. I want to go visit her in Japan. That's awesome. You need to plan a trip.
I do too. I started teaching. I took like a 15-year break, but I so wished I'd taken advantage. When I started in '99, there was still, 6 8-week terms. And you could sign up. The wait list was for 2 years to teach one term in Kuala Lumpur. Remember, anybody old school remember that? When you could go teach in KL for one term. And I thought, but I had a young daughter and I just couldn't see being gone for 2 months. But I thought, my God, to immerse myself in the Malaysian culture for 2 months, I'll do it for free. I'll pay you, So yeah, I think Dad's got to find a way to make Japan somehow visitable. I can do a guest lecture.
I think you are onto something there.
How about everybody else? Thank you, Dr. Moore.
How about everybody else? Experiences in grad school and your students?
I'll go. This is Carla.
Sorry. Hi, Carla.
One thing that I've noticed, and my focus area is marketing, I try to still have online students do a presentation and record it. What I'm seeing are many students not having that experience, and I forgot the gentleman that just spoke, was it Charlie, behind, because the students are hiding behind their computers or their phones. So the lack of the ability to present in an articulate manner is a challenge because they're not having to get up in front of a classroom. And especially at a graduate level, what I see on the flip side is sitting in boardrooms, seeing a CFO trying to present and fumbling. And it looks, they're just lacking the skills. The content that they have is very good, but in the public sector, you look as though you're not as confident. So that's a challenge. That's all I have.
Thanks for sharing that. I've had several online students join Toastmasters for that very reason, to proactively grab up some of those skills that they're missing in an online environment sometimes. Thanks for sharing that. Others, tell us about your experiences in grad school. Bob?
Hi, Bob. It's Bob Mann. One of the things that I've found over the last few years teaching with Ottawa, and I taught with Pace University back in New York with a 16-week semester where we had the ability to present and discuss and so forth. And I was able to integrate some case studies. The course that I teach does have some case studies built into the textbook. But one of the things that I found was that students would come up with recommendations that you couldn't act on. You know, we need to do something about hiring more people. We need a recruiting strategy. We need to reward people differently. And because none of those recommendations are actionable. So if you give them, so if you're sitting in a management meeting and you make a recommendation, you know, the guy who's running, or the woman who's running the meeting says, so what? So what do we do? So what I try and get the students to focus on is coming up with specific actionable recommendations that can be approved or disapproved. And it's one of the challenges that as a faculty member and as a subject matter expert on one course, I'm trying to build into that course.
Do you view that to be related to a lack of work experience they come in with, or a lack of critical thinking? How would you characterize the genesis of that problem?
I think it's a lack of work experience. Even though some of the students have a lot of experience, they don't have, and they can analyze things pretty well. They don't have the experience of having been in actual meetings where they have to come up with a recommendation or a written proposal to take action on something. So if
that.
And I try to give them a little bit of that in the classroom.
Good. Super. Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple others.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Mary.
One of the things I've noticed is that the students just don't have the same ethics that we had. And because I think the online environment creates a sense of a mask, so to speak, and they think nobody's looking and they can cheat and get away with it because most of them, at least most of my students, are also working. They're balancing a lot of plates, they're busy, and we're throwing all this at them in 8 weeks. So we have an accelerated environment, which compounds the problem. So then they just go out, find some information which is available, and cut and paste pretty much. And so they're, you know, again, that's a lack of applying it to their own thoughts to the subject matter. And so that's always a little frustrating as a teacher. You feel like you're playing cop more than you're teaching.
That is disappointing, especially if it's something like a personal reflection, for heaven's sakes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
One of the things, Mary Ann, one of the things that I did in this course that we just redeveloped was all of the weekly written assignments and the term project all go through Safe Assign.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we now have a percentage that is not unique.
Mm-hmm.
And they're getting it from someplace else. Now the problem with Safe Assign is your entire reference list is of course, you don't have, Turnitin has the ability to filter that out. So you ignore the references and citations.
Right.
But it gives you a sense of what percentage is their work versus what percentage is from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. I also noticed in discussions, which are that initial post, they're not reading the other initial post, so they're all repeating the same information and it's coming verbatim out of a book, and they call that good. They put a reference and they figure, well, that's good. I got to put a reference, and what we're clearly in the questions, ask them, put it in your own words, tell me your own experience, give me an example from current, something current. And, they just ignore all that, just skip it and throw it out there because they're just trying to get their points. And so, but, we all, again, the benefit of, I miss those days of having my study group in my MBA program and sitting in a library with a real table and, everybody parsing out the work. And we did it in a different way, but we were connected group, and it's very hard as much as you try to have a Zoom meeting, for example, in your class with an asynchronous environment. It's very difficult, and you'll get a few that'll do really well with it, and about, half of them that you never see or hear from.
Well, I appreciate your comments about Safe Assign. Many of us have used multiple tools like Safe Assign, and all of them have pros and cons, of course. And I think one of our responsibilities is to critically assess what the report means, for exactly the reasons that Bob mentioned, which is that sometimes it's indicative of what's going on with their reference page much more than the content of what they have written for the class. I'm also seeing lots of good chat comments about students needing to understand what happens in the workplace, and how to think things through. Let's see, what else? Let's see. Dr. McLaughlin mentioned that there are websites specific to answer questions of case studies. Oh my goodness. I recently received a paper from a graduate student, and they had referenced Chegg and Course Hero, and those were their two sources. So bless her little heart, she got a 0, and we had a little conversation about that. So thank you for the comments. Certainly the experiences our graduate students bring to the table, and the learning modality and all the tools available to them, means that their experience is a little different than ours, for sure. And so one of the things I wanted to touch on this evening is familiar, I'm sure, to all of you, which is Bloom's taxonomy. Because as we talk about graduate students, I've heard a lot of faculty members express concern that even at the graduate level, they're focused much more on these lower order areas of thinking, the remembering, understanding, and applying, compared to analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, creating something new. And certainly we want to be focused on the top 3 with our graduate students: analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So several of you I know have worked as subject matter experts and done some course development, and I know that many of the discussion questions as well as the assignments are focused on these higher order areas of thinking. But one encouragement I would have for me and all of us is to really seek to reinforce those aspects as we work through the discussion weekly with our students. The propensity is to want to identify, remember, and apply rather than create, synthesize, and evaluate. And I'll be sending these slides to you all later. But the next one I wanted to show you, I loved the verbs they had at the bottom of this slide, because you can grab these as you look at your students' work and say, I noticed that you were commenting, which is part of evaluating, on these 2 hypotheses, or how would you judge this, or how would you predict this might work out? So I like these verbs because sometimes as we're working a lot with our online discussions, we might run out of things to say. So I love those action words. Let's see. Dr. Heidi says, we need to ensure that our questions and assignment reflect the higher level of Bloom's action words. Absolutely. That's exactly right. And so if you notice that your discussion questions are leaning more towards the lower order thinking, please give that feedback, because we certainly want to be focused more on that higher order thinking. So as we think about grad students in general, these are a few things that I know our advisors tell our students. I get to accept a lot of our graduate students, and as I've been talking to my colleagues over the past couple of weeks, I've decided they probably need a bit more instruction, so before they land in any of our classes, they understand we're expecting something different from them, not just a slightly longer paper than they produced at the undergraduate level. So we're asking them to think at a different level. We want them to be analyzing at those higher order areas. We also want them to spend more time researching and writing. And we'll talk a little bit more about this specifically to the EMBA, that writing production can sometimes be a challenge, and they don't always use all the tools available to them. So I think part of our responsibility is to remind them of those tools that they can use and need to understand. There aren't any fluff classes. All of this goes towards their master's degree, and so it's much more focused. I really like to encourage students, in the freedom they have to make assignment choices or the emphasis of their research, to get a 2-for-1 on things that will help make them more marketable or more valuable to their current organization. And they're not always quite as visionary as I would like to see them be, but I like to point them in that direction. As professors, typically, compared to the traditional setting anyway, at the grad students, we treat them more like peers than students. And then maybe less so at Ottawa University, but generally there's a lot more diversity in the classroom at the graduate level, certainly in age. Anybody 20 to 70, 20 to 80 might be in our graduate classrooms, which is really fun. Let's see, Chuck mentioned that NetTutor can be really helpful to those who are using English as their second language. That's a great recommendation. And just double checking everything through SafeAssign, as well as a thorough grammar check, can be helpful as well. I have so much respect for folks who are studying in a second language. My family is hosting a high school young man from France this year, and the seamlessness with which he can transition languages just continues to amaze me. So let's talk a little bit about what then these expectations mean for us as faculty. The first is most of the mentoring challenges that have come to me recently happen because we as faculty, part-time or full-time, were not clear about our expectations to our students at the beginning of the course. It is helpful for them to know that you really mean it when you say it needs to be APA if that's what is called for in your class. It's helpful for them to know that you're going to count them down or up based on the rubric that is embedded in your course. I think it's helpful to provide examples, and we have some examples that are helpful in the online Ottawa Online Library. Some of you all who teach the graduate business courses, we're moving a little bit more towards business writing and not as much hardcore APA. And then in some of the arts and sciences, some of you all use MLA rather than APA. So just make sure that's really clear. Because if we get to week 3 and there's an upset student, if we weren't clear on our expectations, we're not setting them up for a win, and we're causing ourselves some headaches as well. I want to really encourage you all to provide feedback that moves your graduate students towards those higher order thinking questions and thought processes. So if I'm switching back and forth between an undergrad and now I'm going to be working in a graduate class, I kind of remind myself, I even put a little sign up that says higher order thinking, because those should be admonished. Those grad students need to be pushed differently. A decent number of our grads who get a master's degree at OU go on to get a doctoral degree. And so we are doing them a disservice if we let them stay where they are and don't require them to stretch themselves. As many of you have said in the chat, we really need application-oriented questions related to the feedback and the discussion as well as their assignments. How does this really work in the boardroom? How does this really work in the real world? And if they don't have the work experience to know that, then they need to call somebody who does. They need to put on their student hat and ask for input and mentoring in a way that will help benefit them professionally. One of the biggest takeaways that I hope we all have this evening is that Ottawa University really does care about a high level of rigor and quality in all our classes, but particularly at the graduate level. Please don't go the easy route, and I don't see anybody on here that does, but give the full points and avoid giving them the good feedback they need. I was just messaging with the dean of the business school, Dr. Lena Rodriguez, today, and she said, please be sure to remind everyone tonight that we really care about rigor. So this is me reminding all of us that we really do care about rigor and quality. So what questions or thoughts do you all have about those expectations for students as well as faculty? Either on the messaging or unmute and share, please. This is when I start wondering if there's a good game on that I'm missing. Oh,
Kristen,
what were you saying?
You are missing the debates.
That's what I'm saying too.
Oh, I didn't think about that when we scheduled this.
You know, it was interesting in last night's debates. Someone, I think maybe it was Charlie, was talking about people talking in generalities and not specifics. A lot of the criticism some of the Democratic candidates had of each other last night is pie in the sky kind of ideas instead of coming up with really practical solutions to things. So it shows it's not something that's peculiar to students. It applies to all of us in the politics and in the business world as well. I was thinking that when I was in graduate school and undergraduate school, everything, you went to the library and you used a card box, index box to find things. Research is so much easier these days that maybe students get spoiled. They don't understand how difficult it was to do the research back in the day. And maybe the fact that it's so much easier now means we have to do what you're saying, Dr. Moore, and that's to really challenge them because it is easy to get lazy and just Google research, and you can turn out a really nice 10-page paper without spending a lot of time doing it. So it is incumbent upon us to be diligent in pushing students to do critical thinking.
Good comments, Garth. I appreciate that. How do you do that? How do you do that in your classes?
You know, one of the things we're doing right now in business ethics, it's undergraduate, not graduate, but I think they're doing it in graduate, is using Collaborate, doing some simulations. And I think simulations bring a lot of value to students. We've had some really good feedback because we've not only done the simulations, in the following week we're having students come in to collaborate in a live discussion. And even though it's taking days, some will say, well, you know, I didn't sign up to come in live. I signed up to do this on my own time online. But even the ones who say that are also expressing really positive thoughts about coming together. They like the personal interaction and they're really feeding off each other, sharing ideas. I think that if we can integrate that live interaction along with online courses, I think it's very valuable.
How many of you offer optional office hours or optional synchronous conversations in your classes? I do every term, and I try to put it about week 5 when they've got questions emerging for their big paper and they're starting to feel nervous and tempted to procrastinate. I purposely place it right there in hopes that they will leverage that opportunity to chat about it a little bit. Mary, I saw you did. Who else does? Let's see. Dr. Rutley says week 2 and week 5. Good. Dr. Durant says, I offer an open conference call. That's good. Yeah, it's a nice option to offer. I'm always wishing more would show up than do. And it feels to me like the best students are the ones that show up for the video call, and the ones that really need it, bless their hearts, they're too busy and they don't show up, which is always a little bit sad. Let's see. A Cost accounting, there was a group project. It was challenging, but I think the students rose to the challenge. Awesome, Mary. That's great. Let's see. Soon to be Dr. Bond says, I'm getting my doctorate now. And every week they have, yeah, just offering it. I think I've heard it said that it's kind of like the swimming pool at the hotel. Everybody likes the idea that they've got the swimming pool, but few use it. I think it's kind of like that with a video call or video office hours that are optional to students. So any other comments to share about expectations for grad students and for us as faculty when we are teaching at the grad level by chance?
One of the things that I experience is that there's a reluctance on the part of the students, grad students, to use the library. They're all quick enough on Google or Bing or whatever to come up with quick online sources. And some of them, when you look at them, they're article sources that you have to subscribe to. And I'm sure they're not subscribing to them because they'll have 2 or 3 different ones in a paper. And what they're looking at is the abstract of the article and pulling out of the abstract. And I still haven't found the magic sauce for getting them to the library. I do evaluate the source of the references, and if they're not really credible references, I do deduct points for that under the rubric. But I just can't get them to use the library.
What about the rest of you? What has led to some success in getting your students to do legitimate research for your papers?
Hey, Kristen, it's Casey Johnson. How are you?
Hey there, Casey. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Hey, everyone. I'm an education person, but business runs in my blood because it was my whole family's majors. But something I've really found success with is a flow chart that I found online, but it goes through literally a yes and no flow chart for whether it's truly a scholarly article. And I was noticing people were just they were posting like YouTube videos and a graduate level. And I'm like, are you kidding me? So put up this flow chart and said, hopefully this will guide you through. And hey, if you want to send me your list of things by Wednesday of the week, I will tell you if they are or they aren't. We'll do this one time as we kind of transition through, but that'll help you not waste time looking at research that maybe isn't applicable or isn't reliable and valid. Let me know. And the people who took advantage of it found that their writing and my responses to them were so much more positive. And the people who didn't, I would say, man, it's such a bummer that you didn't take advantage of that opportunity to show me your resources by Wednesday, because I would have told you that these things are not acceptable at this level of research and education. Maybe next week you can figure it out, refer back to the flow chart. But it was just a simple visual that helped guide them through. And I think for a lot of them, it helped quantify what they thought was research and they realized it wasn't.
That's a helpful comment. That's a great idea. And understanding the difference between a primary and a secondary source, not all students got that at the undergraduate level. So sometimes we need to remind and refresh them on that. That's a great idea. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Johnson. We've got lots of good chat going on. Thank you all very much for sharing your good ideas. I think I use announcements heavily because what I've found at grad and undergrad levels, the students simply do not read all the resources out there. and they hardly take a look at the syllabus sometimes, which is exasperating. So I lean pretty heavily on announcements that I also email to them. So if later there's confusion or lack of clarity, I've got the announcement to point them back to. Several of you said on the chat that you hear from your students that you are the first and meanest faculty member ever to hold them accountable for APA or critical thinking or higher learning skills. And I think if we took a poll, everybody on this call has heard that same thing. Don't buy it, friends. Don't buy it. The 4 full-time online faculty teach all of the brand new undergrad students and some of the graduate students as they begin their program. And something the 4 of us care very much about is getting them started on the right foot when it comes to APA formatting. So they may forget it. They may try to sell you a line that you're the first and meanest person to ever hold them accountable for that, but don't buy what they're selling. It's not the case. Bless their little hearts. Okay. All right. Well, let me screen share again. Any other thoughts anybody wanted to jump in on? Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Executive MBA program. And before I jump into this, how many of you have taught in the EMBA program that are on the call? Could you either hit me up in chat or raise your hand? Okay. Okay, so several. Yep. Okay. All right, so several of you have. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much for joining us. I would really like to talk a little bit specifically about the EMBA program. And those of you who have not yet taught in the EMBA, it's a face-to-face format, and it is at our Arizona campus, very large group of students there. They come in on the weekend between the end of week 8 and the beginning of week 1 each term. And it's basically a weekend intensive course. And these are students who come from all over the United States. Most of them are from other countries, predominantly China and India. And they are here working full-time in most cases. And so they come in for the weekend intensive, and the vast majority of the instruction occurs during that weekend. So they're there Fridays most of the day, Saturday all day, Sunday from early until about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And so Charlie, you mentioned traveling around and teaching. Several of us I know on this call have done those kind of weekend intensive courses around the world, teaching those. And it is intense. And then there's very little work they do online, which means it's an interesting amalgamation. So let me just...
I get to experience that, or some of us do. That sounds really cool.
It is cool. And then there are also some challenges too that I know several of us on the phone, on the call here can discuss. I do see a question, are there plans for the EMBA to go online? The answer is not at this time, because the majority of these students are taking these classes in order for their immigration status to stay in place the way they want it, so they can work and gain work experience while getting an MBA. Many of them have attended quite prestige undergrad programs, such as Duke, for example. And then many of them have studied in their home countries as well, and then come to OU. So as several of you have said in the chat, it's an incredible opportunity if you do get to teach in this area, because it is very culturally diverse. I'll just tell on myself, I made a terrible mistake. They thought it was funny. I was red-faced and embarrassed. So I was in front of a group, and this was a face-to-face meeting, and most of them were from India. And of course, you know, when we're teaching face-to-face, we want to never swear or say anything inappropriate, of course, right? And so somebody said something rather amazing, and I frequently say, maybe you're going to guess it. I said, "Holy cow, that's amazing." And as soon as it came off my lips, friends, I was like, "Oh, darn it. That is not what I intended to say," to my friends from India. And they were not offended. And I was grateful they weren't offended. And I only made that mistake once. So, Bob, you wanted to tell us something. Dr. Armbrust, what did you want to share with us?
Well, first of all, I do teach an MBA. It's a very, there's a very heavy teaching on the days that they are there, which is Friday when they end a course, and then on Saturday and Sunday, on Saturday they start a new course, and
Yes.
Sunday they are also on campus, and then they go out for 8 weeks online. So it's very intense over the weekend, as you know, and I find that they're very, very capable students, very intelligent, and they have a pretty darn good work ethic as well. And it's pretty challenging for faculty because you have to stay ahead of them, and you have to make sure that you are ready to teach them when you get there, because when you get up there for 8 hours and you have a group of people that are that smart and that intelligent, you need to come prepared. So if you are ever teaching that, that would be my recommendation, would be to prepare very well. It's very intense, but I certainly enjoy teaching it, and I learn a great deal from them about their culture. And as you said, it's very diverse, but I have mostly individuals from India with a few people from China in there. I also noticed from a cultural standpoint, they are very respectful of faculty, and they address you as professor and sir and ma'am, and they're very, very courteous. And I think that is a point of their culture and the expectations in their own country. So it is a little different. Some of them are a little bit difficult to understand, but after teaching for a while, I've learned to understand them much better. But I really enjoy teaching them, and if anyone has the opportunity, I would highly recommend it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob. Yeah,
this is Wendy Bond. Oh.
Yes, Wendy, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, this was my very first teaching experience and teaching with the EMBA program, and it was absolutely wonderful. It definitely surprised me, though, because the structure of the EMBA program is very similar. I'm an Ottawa graduate, also online, and the structure was very similar to how we did it when I went to Ottawa, where you had the face-to-face, and then you went online for 8 weeks. So I really enjoyed that, but I think they still struggle with the on-time aspect, which as a graduate student in my classes, I didn't struggle with that, and my peers didn't either. So I see that maybe as a cultural difference for them, is that they struggle to come on time and come back on time and stay on time throughout the course. And even in turning their assignments on time, they seem to struggle with that piece of it. Very intelligent, very capable, wonderful people to work with. I think that's their main struggle, is the on-time aspect of and the challenge for us is as teaching them.
Good observations. Yeah. I notice when there are fun social things to do on Friday night and Saturday night, there are a lot of people who arrive early or a little bit late the next morning. Who else? Anybody else? I see lots of great comments. Mary, I appreciate what you shared there in the chat about they don't always understand some of the cultural references and examples maybe from media. And they also share some things that I don't understand, and I just have to ask, which is a really enjoyable exchange. But what I wrote here with the EMBA program on this slide is just a couple of things that I have noticed make a difference in my preparation when I'm teaching in the EMBA program. Typically, English obviously is not the first language. And so I think as a group, this group of students is more and more clear that they need to use the tools that are going to help them be successful in writing. But compared to our domestic MBA students, they are more precise, and it may be because many of them work in IT, but the diligence is there, and it's very good. The biggest concern that I've heard faculty voice is the last two, that they are more comfortable in a traditional lecture format. And so for those of us who have taught domestic students for a long time, when we ask them to engage us or ask them to answer a question or share their opinion, it seems that they may be, domestic students may be a little more willing and comfortable to share their thoughts than sometimes our EMBA students are. But the biggest challenge we've had with this group has been plagiarism. And so I would just encourage everybody to really be certain that you're using Safe Assign if it's not automatically attached to the assignment. As Bob was sharing that some of his design, he's been making sure that that's there. As faculty, we can even require them to run it through Safe Assign and post it, and have a little mini conversation or a mini lecture about what does that report mean and what are we looking for. But the plagiarism is something I would very much encourage you to be diligent in, because we need them for professional reasons to go out into the community understanding this concept clearly. And for those who have come from cultures that are perhaps a little more collaborative, that's viewed as good teamwork, not plagiarism and not cheating. So for those of you who have been teaching in the EMBA, we started to hear a little bit of this. I see a couple hands raised. Could you all share, Andrew and Dr. Black and Dr. Armbrust, could you all share your thoughts? Go ahead, Dr. Black.
Sure, thank you. So just a couple really quick things. I've been teaching with Ottawa now for about 2 years. I also teach in an international program for another institution as well. Plagiarism has consistently been an issue, really more so in the other institution than in Ottawa. I have not seen it that much in Ottawa, but I do want to share just really quick. I also teach in IT. I've worked in the IT industry for about 30 years, and it's interesting to me that the students tend to appear to spend more time figuring out how to plagiarize than they do if they would just write their paper themselves. And there's two quick things I just want to make sure everybody's aware of. Safe Assign is a great tool, as is Turnitin and other plagiarism detection softwares, but there are methods now that the students are employing that fool Safe Assign. One of which, for example, is they will take plagiarized content and then manually enter, let's say, a letter S in white font in between every word in the paper, so that it just looks like a really long string of characters when it runs through Safe Assign. So it comes through as like a 0 or a really low percentage. And in other cases, they end up using entire content that they run through an AI thesaurus to change certain words so that the sentences, again, don't look like exactly the same thing they just copied from, but it completely destroys the meaning and the wording that's given in the particular content itself. And so just relying on the percentage isn't really always going to work well. You've got to look at and read the content, and then sometimes you have to do some manual checking. But like I said, I haven't seen it as bad with Ottawa students as I have in the other institution that I teach for as well. Most of the students that I've run into with Ottawa, and I teach in both the computer science and the EMBA programs, so I just stay every weekend and continue to flop between courses. They tend to actually be pretty good, and if you are consistent and you hold them to it and call them on it, they will perform effectively. You will always have those one or two students in the class that don't seem to do anything or don't listen or don't actually read your feedback and don't change anything. But just be as consistent as you can and make sure that you're reviewing the content to make sure that it's not just relying on the percentages that Safe Assign shows. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. I haven't heard about the white letter trick in a while. That is frustrating.
And this is Bob Armbrust again. And just to add to what he was saying, I think, or what we were saying earlier, is it really gets back to our expectations. And at the first meeting, if you set those expectations relative to plagiarism and the fact you're not going to accept plagiarized work, I think it goes a long way. I do that. I don't see a lot of it in the courses I teach in the EMBA. I have seen some. And to another point you made earlier, as far as having more of a lecturing model of teaching, I do find that is very true. But one thing I have done is, and they have enjoyed, is working more in teams, doing case studies. I have them review a case study and then report as a team. They seem to do very well with that. But you're right that they are there. You can tell that they're accustomed to a more lecture type of modality. Thank you.
If you all notice that a case study or a question is being consistently plagiarized and it's out there on Chegg, please provide that feedback at the end of the course, or email me or email Dr. Koch, because certainly some of those small adjustments we can make quickly, and several of you have indicated that can be a challenge, and it is. So what Mary said is exactly what I'm trying to say, is we need to keep those refreshed. We need to change them. At OU, we've got limited resources with our curriculum design studio. However, there are a lot of us who are able to get into the master and change a question or change something, so that whether it's an Excel spreadsheet where they're being tempted to cheat, or it's a case study and the question has been republished in other places, we can make some of those changes. So as you notice those things, please share those, because that certainly feeds into rigor and quality of our program as well. Absolutely. Wendy, I see you're unmuted. Were you going to share something? Anybody else? All right. Well, we're coming up. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, this is Andy again.
Yes,
just one
thank
other really
you.
quick observation in teaching the residency sessions. There are challenges that we continue to face with students, and there was a discussion of this earlier tonight regarding the students being on time, right? It's a challenge of those students who show up late and then want to leave early, and they try to put a lot of pressure on teachers. Oh, so-and-so teacher has let their students out early, we need to go too. And that's not really the case. And so we are required to keep the students in seat, right? We have seat time requirements that we have to meet. And so we need to be diligent as well in supporting each other as faculty when we're teaching in those on-ground environments, to make sure that, again, we're consistent, we're holding the students accountable and responsible for the time that we're supposed to be in class, you know, in essence, doing our job as well, and, you know, holding the students accountable for being there as they're supposed to be as well. It's just one of those other challenges that have been a consistent battle that I've seen over the last couple of years.
I really appreciate those comments, Andy. And, you know, in Overland Park, and I assume in Arizona and Wisconsin, there's a faculty huddle at the beginning of the weekend, and get to know the faculty around you. You're going to find it very encouraging and comforting that you are not the only one who cares about doing a very high quality job for your students. You're not the only one who's the mean ogre about APA. You're just not the only one. But I appreciate those encouraging remarks, because none of us should be the first one out of the building on any given night of the week when we're teaching for OU or anywhere else, and the EMBA as well. And so we can encourage each other. In Overland Park, we really like to, if I'm taking a little break and I've got my class working on a project for 10 minutes or something, I will go next door and say hello to those students, or introduce myself to the group I know is going to hit my class in a term or two. And some of us, you know, really take that opportunity to talk each other up. You know, wow, if you end up in Catherine Brewer's class, you are going to be so happy because she really knows about X, Y, and Z. And you know, Deborah Logan, nobody knows more about boards than she does. And so you've got to get in her class. And I think we can also help create a very positive expectation about how great the class is going to be, but also that it's going to be tough and you're going to be glad because you're really going to learn some good stuff. So thank you. Any other comments, friends? We're about up to the top of the hour. Well, if you have other questions that you would like to discuss or concerns that come across your desk, please feel very welcome to reach out proactively. We're going to continue this discussion with some other elements out in October, but I so appreciate all of you being here. Thank you very much for making time to discuss our graduate students and to share your experiences and encouragement. And you'll be getting a link with our recording. And I just appreciate all of you sharing your time this evening. So thank you so much. Have a great evening. Bye for now.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Miss Mary. See you later. Charlie, thanks for all your great conversation and points. Dr. Neal, I saw you sitting outside. We're all jealous.